Okay, so now we're going to cover Chapter 5, Website Design. Okay, and basically website design is, if you think about it, you basically at this point, we are just creating simple pages. So, we don't really have to think about how we're designing it. We're just going to have one page and then just create it. You might think of what you're going to do for this page, but it's not like you have to do an extensive design, pre go through the whole process of thinking, okay, what kind of web pages are we going to have, where are the pages going to link from, what are the pictures, what are the links, what are the colors. So at this point, you don't really have to put too much thought in the assignment. But if you think about a large website like Alamo Colleges, there needs to be some sort of planning ahead of time so you can determine what's going to link from what do we need, that kind of stuff, what kind of pictures, what kind of colors, that kind of thing. So that's what this chapter is all about. Okay, and this is basically also something, the other things that you might want to consider as well. So, you know, at this point, what we're doing in this class, we're doing HTML and multimedia, but when you're doing a bigger site, you're thinking about so much more: the management, um, quality and assurance. You have to do a lot of testing. You're doing models, systems analysis and design, and even for, especially with when it comes to websites where you're dealing with money or personal information, you need to make sure that you have security. And then, of course, there, who's going to do the support and maintenance part. Okay, so that's generally the first part, and then we have a planning cycle section, which is just how you're going to plan your website. And one thing you want to think about, or a few things that you want to think about, is your planning, and that's great that you have a plan, but there are some things to keep an eye out for, which would be, your customer. And now we're thinking about, a bigger website, and so your customer could be like Chase Bank. And if Chase Bank contacts you and says they want a website, but they really don't give you details about the site that they want, they just say, hey, I want a site, it needs to um, do bank stuff. Well, that's not details. You need details. So if they give you vaguely designed cases on what they want the site to do, or project requirements, you need to make sure that they give you the details that you need. You don't want them being broad on the features that they want. You need them to be specific. And I mean, if you think about it, you can't just assume what they want, because if you start developing something that you assume and then they don't like it, you just did all that work for nothing. So we don't want to do that. Um, Another issue may be that there's disputes between stakeholders. Maybe, the committee that wants this website is not, their plans aren't aligning with, the administration or the board. So just keep an eye out for that. Then there's also a chance where you can have unrealistic resources. If they tell you, okay, I want this website tomorrow, that's just unrealistic. If they give you $5, that's unrealistic. But of course, in a larger situation, you would have, a bigger budget, but still it might not make sense. So one thing that you might want to look at is, or one thing that you might want to use is this SMART acronym. And that means specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So you want the information that you get from these companies to meet these standards here, just to make sure that you have good information from them or good input from them. Okay. Okay, so the specific part of it would be you don't want the company to say, or somebody to say, give me a proposal or give the customer a proposal. You want to be more specific, because delivering a proposal could be, well, okay, I'll give it to them next month, or I'll just throw whatever I think together. And of course, that could be wrong, and you really don't want to assume what people want. So you want to be very detailed. This proposal is going to have price quotes, it's going to reflect the 15% discount. If you're not specific about what you want, then you might not get what you want. Okay, so measurable, basically you want to have a clear indicator when something is completed. So a bad example would be complete 20% of the site, but have you really determined what is 20% of the site? Well, if you say something like 15 pages, well, that is very clear as to what needs to be completed at the time. We also have attainable. Is it even possible to do what they're asking you to do? For example, if you ask somebody to drive from New York to California within 24 hours, well, that's just not possible. So that would not be a good example. But getting a server to FedEx store by the close of a business day, then that would work. Okay, another thing that you want to look at when you're getting information from the companies to develop a website, you want to make sure that it's realistic. So is it realistic given the timeline and resources? So, okay, in the situation here, can you have somebody create 10 pages by tomorrow, just one person, or would it make more sense that a staff of 20 would be able to complete the project? So yes, of course, I can create 10 pages in just a few minutes, but it won't make much sense. It won't be very good, but sure, I can make that. So of course, 10 pages of some quality work would need an entire team. And of course, you would need some sort of planning, because if it's 10 pages, you need to have links. How is it going to link from what to what? What is each one going to have? What is each one going to look like? So it's not going to happen within a day. Okay, timely. Will the objective be useful? So let's say, okay, so in this situation here, a bad example would be to give a proposal by the actual day that the proposal, or a sitemap available. I'm sorry, let me start over. A bad example would be if you needed a sitemap, but you delivered the sitemap at the same day that the proposal was due, instead of submitting that earlier, so that the person working on the proposal could actually incorporate that with the report. So we need to make sure that it be useful when it's submitted. Okay, and then the chapter goes on to explain a little bit more about those, the SMART acronym. Okay, and now we're down to the section called the fold. And basically it relates to, or the reason why it has that is because it's very similar to newspapers. Newspapers typically on the very top middle area, they have the most attractive story, in large letters because they want, to attract your attention and they want you to purchase the newspaper. So that area is actually referred to as above the fold. And of course, there's an image of a newspaper that's actually folded. So the most important thing or the most attractive thing to attract you would be on the top of that fold, which is on the bottom there. So similar to newspapers, you actually want your website to be attractive as the users get to your site. So if you have a home page, and we'll discuss colors later, but if you have a home page that has terrible colors, it doesn't matter what content you have. It's not attractive. It doesn't look professional. So you're just going to lose your users. And later on, it actually tells you how quickly you can lose users because of bad colors and bad design. Okay, and just to point out that it doesn't mean that everything on your web page has to fit only one non-scrolling screen, but just make sure that the landing page, the very first page that they see, is could be attractive, or at least pay real close attention to what it looks like or how it's designed. Typography is something that not everybody could be aware of, but it is the study of font. So I actually took an entire class on typography, which was surprising to me at the time, but there is so much about how words are written. We have different fonts. We have Calibri, we have Arial, New Times Roman, Comic Sans. There's so many different fonts. Well, there's so many different even names of different attributes of these fonts. Like there's loop, counter, there's serif. If you recognize that there's serif fonts that actually say serif, it's because they have an extra design on different points. Terminal bar, and then there's a baseline, descender line, ascender line. So it's there's lots of traits to typography, and just the way things are written can has a certain feel to the site, like Comic Sans. So you're kind of a fun site. Maybe if it's a professional site, you might want to use Arial, Calibri, or New Times New Roman. So fonts really do are pretty important. They do make sense to really look at. Okay. And just to also point out is you want to make sure that you don't have a whole bunch or many different fonts, because that just would not look professional. So they actually recommend just keeping 2 or 3 fonts. There are web fonts that you can link to, and if you go to this Google Fonts website, there's a repository of links that you can use. At some point in the past, you had to be very specific. You couldn't use fonts that were uncommon, because if you used that and somebody didn't have that font on their computer, then it wouldn't look exactly the way you wanted it to look. So, but having these web fonts kind of helps out that situation there. Okay, sitemaps are the next section, and basically a sitemap is like a plan or how to organize how your site's going to be. Because remember, again, you have a main page, and from that main page you have different pages linked from it. So you have to organize how things are going to be linked together, and that's what a sitemap is for. Well, actually at the very beginning, you're organizing it, but then you also have a sitemap as a file that has a master list of the pages on your site. we discussed earlier about bots and how bots can be, bots are basically where you can have a computer control other computers. Well, you can actually use a bot maliciously, like we've mentioned before, but this is actually a more positive reason to use a bot. And so you have a computer indexing the site for search engines, so you can actually be found using Google or Bing or whatever search engine you're using. And sitemaps are basically XML documents. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of XML. We're learning HTML in this class, but XML is generally the same. Well, it's not the same, but it looks very similar to what HTML documents look like, and we'll see that in just a second. And it's extensible markup language. HTML is hypertext markup language. Okay, so here is a sample of a detailed sitemap. So you have a main page, and then you have pages linked from them, or pages linked from it, and then all the pages linked accordingly. So this is what a sitemap would look like, if it was drawn out. But of course, remember that a sitemap would be an XML file. And here is somebody, organizing how their site is going to look. So you can see that, it takes extensive design and planning to create a site, at least a large site. Okay, so remember earlier last chapter I talked about standards, where you have the OSI model, where it's a standard of how data should be move through the internet or through your system to get to the internet. Well, there's also standards when it comes to sitemaps, and then there's standards for XML too, and I'll cover that in just a second. So once your sitemap is complete and uploaded, you can add it to a file called robots.txt, which I'll explain in just a second. And this is what the line would look like. And then, of course, you can submit your site to search engines. There's different types of search engines. Google does it one way, Bing does it another way. So just you could actually choose which search engine you use depending on how it actually searches. So more info on that. And here is what an XML file looks like. And it's pretty important that you know just the basics of XML files, knowing that we're taking a web development class. So remember, actually, let me go ahead and so if you look at this HTML code here, this line here, we actually haven't done it in our HTML lab yet, but generally I would say all programming languages have some sort of line on the top that describe what that document is for. And that's exactly what this line is for. It tells you that, okay, it's an XML file. Of course, eventually, if you scroll down, you can kind of figure it out. But, just in case, just because we need to have that line there. So, okay, so what does the XML look like? And unfortunately, there's this in the middle of it. It's in the middle of a page. But basically, you have a URL set. And actually, let me go ahead and bring up, let me go ahead and continue here first. URL set, and so we have this main line here, And that's very similar to what the HTML tag will look like. At this point, let me go ahead and bring up this part here. At this point, all we have is just HTML. That's all we've done. But there's other things that you can put, or actually the body tag here, sorry. The body tag here, there's so much more that you can put after this body tag. It's not just body and that's it. There's more things you can put, generally just like this one here. You have, oops, you have information after that. Okay, then we have your URL, and then we have location. Notice how it's indented. So these things are inside this URL tag. We have LOC for location, last modified, and then priority. And notice how there isn't a close tag here. So that's kind of an issue. It should have a close. If you look right here, there are issues in this text, I know, but I'll point them out when we run into them. So here's the URL set, and you don't see URL set. All you see are these URLs, location, last modified, and priority. It's not until you get up all the way to the top that you see URL set again. So just like we do in HTML, we have an open HTML and then a close HTML. That's exactly what it's doing here. One on the top and then one on the bottom. Then within this URL set, we have URL and then stuff inside. Here's URL, the same stuff inside, URL again, same stuff inside, URL, same stuff. And also notice the things on the inside, they have an open and close tag as well. Open, close, open, close. Now, when it comes to XML, one of the main things that's different about it is that these tags here on the inside of URL are user defined. So that means that actually when it's a sitemap, you have to have location, but that's pretty much all that you need as in the sitemap file. But in typical XML, oh, and I'm sorry, let me just continue. This is the one that's required, but any additional ones are optional in a sitemap XML file. But when it comes to XML in general, because you can use XML in many different ways, but when you create XML files in general, all of these tags are user defined. And what that means is the person that's creating the file determines what these tags are. And that's very different from HTML files, because HTML files, you have to have HTML, you have to have head, you have to have body, or any other tags that you use in this file are predetermined. It's not user determined. It's determined initially as HTML tags. So similar to HTML files, but not exactly. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I said just location is required, but for sitemaps, it's location, URL, and URL set. So it's the location. But in addition, these main URL tags and the URL set tags are required, just not these two in the middle. Okay, so here's remember I mentioned earlier the robots.txt file. That is the file that we have that has, well, it's a basic text file kept in the root folder of your website, and it tells robots, remember earlier I talked about bots, well, robots, on what sections or types of content in your site you want them, or you want them to, or you want them not to index, or basically make searchable. So that is the robots.txt file. And so we put the line in that bots file. And let me go ahead and scroll up just to show you again. Oops. And it's being very far. I think I passed it. Sitemaps. There it is. This is the line that you want in the robots.txt file to tell bots what exactly, or what page is the XML file first. Then within that robots.txt file, it tells the bots what can be indexed. So in this situation here, well, we have these two lines, user agent and disallow. And user agent, right here, it specifies the rules to apply to all robots that read the file. The second line is that nothing is allowed. So here's the user agent, and here's the second line here. So you're saying that nothing is allowed. And, that's possible. But then it would be like, what's the point in putting that line in the robots.txt file? But generally, typically, you would have something like this. So now we're saying, okay, user agent, and we want to have these different areas not allowed, but everything else is fine. Okay, and here's just another situation here: allow, disallow, that kind of thing. Okay, so wireframes, they provide an overall idea of how a site will operate. So we're looking at a general illustration of what the website's going to look like. It doesn't have color, it doesn't have actual content or advanced design decisions like typography. So it'll look very similar to something like this. It's very general, but you have a somewhat of an idea of what the site's going to look like. So we have, this is like your main title, then we have links on top. And if you can kind of see that, it says from the whatever tab. So when somebody clicks on one of these, then it's going to go to one of these areas here. So, and then there's more details. I can't exactly read it though. Okay, so that's wireframing, where there's not a lot of colors, it's not very detailed, it's just very general. But then we have storyboarding, where we actually use the wireframes and then we start adding color, font, and rough images. So then it's going to look something like this. And, just like you would, a storyboard, creating a video game or, even a movie, they're going to do something like this to plan how the movie's going to go. So the same with the website here. So that's storyboarding. I mentioned color schemes earlier, and color schemes, you want, remember again, going back to the FOD, we want your page to look attractive, because if it looks unprofessional or unappealing, then you're going to lose, and here it says you can lose users in less than 10 seconds if it seems too busy, disorganized, out of style. And you probably might remember a time when you went to a website and you just it was just unappealing to you, or maybe unprofessional. I definitely are wary of unprofessional sites, because it could be a site that somebody created just to gain your information. So yeah, I'm very careful about which websites I visit. Even I know I have a firewall and antivirus, but I'm still careful about it. I'm not going to take any risks. So here are some websites here that you can venture into that just gives you information about designing, or even just to compare what color schemes may look like, to give you an idea. to what it may look like when you implement it on your website. So those are really helpful websites there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here.